Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We were at a running race over the weekend, and my calves are fairly seized from my efforts. My single lap.
Well, that's right. Yeah, we were at the Sulphur Springs Trail Race, and we were part of a relay team so the relay team is like 8 laps of 20K loops for a total of 100 miles. So like pretty fun, pretty long.
It was a well-run event. I guess it's been running, I think, 37 years, something to that. Very big. I don't know if it's the biggest trail run in Canada, but it is very big. I think it was 170 people entered the 100-miler, something like 270. Again, these aren't exact, but in the 100K.
And a ton of people,
solo. And then the relay, which are a lot of 8-person teams, there was many teams. I'm not sure how many there were, but there was a lot of people. And this was all at the finish. If you've done Paris to Ancaster on your bicycle, this all started and finished right from the top of Martin Road, that big finish to the Paris to Ancaster Spring Classic. So it was sort of familiar territory, but we are now on foot.
Which means if you've ever done Paris to Ancaster, bearing in mind this is an 8-lap course for the 100-milers, so you had to come up the finish to Paris to Ancaster 8 times. So Peter did a loop for the relay. I did 4 loops for the relay, which was enough for sure. And what I really loved about it though for me was I got to do it, like I started at 2:15 in the afternoon, so that meant I went into the night. So I went, just after 10 I finished up. So it was great practice for me from a 100-mile perspective, because that's a time of day that I'm not normally running. Definitely I'm not starting a run, and rarely do I finish runs in the dark. So that transition time, especially like the evening to dark, I think was a really interesting time to be out running. So definitely glad I did that. I'm feeling less sore than I expected to, which is nice. Hip flexors are a little funky, but
for a 50-miler, 80K. So that was, a good little, I guess we call that like a C race for you, a practice race.
Which I think has been really hard for people to comprehend. Like 50 miles is a C race, but I think it really is. It was actually just being able to do a super long run in a really great environment where there were tons of people, there were, aid stations, porta potties, all the stuff you could possibly want, but definitely like low pressure in terms of going super fast or anything.
Well, and we just had one of our Q&As from the past weeks was sort of, do you have to do the race distance before you race the race distance? There was a little more targeted towards running, but we talked about how in biking it could be the distance or it could be the time even that you're, do you need to do a 12-hour race before you do a 12-hour race? So in this case, you were doing a 50-miler instead of a 100-miler, and that was one of the things we spoke about was sort of maybe a 50% rule or something to that effect.
Yeah. What I kept noticing, though, during it, and this is maybe kind of going back to that topic, is you do race those very differently. So it was kind of a weird experience as I'm, running the thing. In that race, I walked for 30 seconds of it. The rest of it I was running, and in 100 I would have approached that course totally differently. So I was kind of trying to keep it in my head, like, you probably wouldn't be doing this exact thing in 100. But I do think it was actually really good because it did show me I could in fact run a lot more of a course than I necessarily think, because I think in 100 milers you get this weird the common rule of thumb that you get told is like walk the ups, like almost default to walking the ups rather than kind of deciding on each up whether or not you'll walk. So pros and cons to that, because definitely you can risk burning matches anytime you do run the hills. But flip side, there's David and Megan talked about this a while ago on their podcast, the Swap podcast. Running is so much faster than walking, even on a hill. Like you're running slow up a hill, but you're going so much faster than you are if you're walking it. So it's minutes.
Right.
And I mean, in the 100-miler, our friend Krista did amazing. She finished second. And, and actually the woman who won the women's overall finished second overall by only 20 minutes. And if you think about that in the course of 100, that's walking versus running a few hills. It's not that much. So it's wild how fast that stuff can add up over the course of 100 miles.
Yep. Yeah, it all sort of does, and that's sort of the fun stuff with the longer distance events is, where does the strategy of the pacing and then even the rest stops, and yeah, in running it's sort of this walking versus running, but I mean in biking it could be hike-a-biking versus, maybe you're continuing to pedal, but there is that reality, I guess, at some point it's power in either case. You don't have the horsepower to keep things moving.
Well, and we've talked about that a few times with questions around when do you get off and walk, and part of that is actually knowing when to get off and not going until you're stalled out. It's better to, hop off while you still have some momentum to keep going right up versus having to stop and put down a foot and get off the bike.
Sure. And there's probably the middle option of you ride some and, or you could walk and run some too. Yeah, there's the steep pitches. Yeah, so that sort of relates to one of our questions. We have a Q&A today with 2 questions. We have one about failing workouts and we have one about should you use heart rate or power during a race, which could relate to this question of walking, running, or it could relate to this question of hike-a-bike, or these different things as we're going into the climb. So those are the questions today that we'll deal with. Did you want to do a little ad spot here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am right now were it not for AG1. And that might be a slight exaggeration, but honestly, when it comes to keeping healthy during a lot of these efforts, you're carb loading during the week. You're trying to kind of cut out some of the fiber, which means you're dropping your veggie intake a little bit around these races. And I think for me, that's really where AG1 shines as far as having this one nutritional supplement that just kind of checks all the boxes: your probiotics, prebiotics, adaptogens, greens, vitamins, minerals, superfoods, just all the fun stuff in one NSF certified for sport formula. That actually tastes really good too. So I really like having it around, especially around races, which is why I super love the travel packs.
Awesome. And those are bonuses, special bonuses. You get 5 travel packs?
Yes, plus a year of immune supporting vitamin D plus K2 drops. And you can get that over at drinkag1.com/MollyH when you subscribe. And I'm going to say, I've said it before, the subscription's super easy to manage. You can pause them if you're going to be on a long vacation. Just really, really convenient and great site to use, in addition to being just a very tasty greens product.
Very good.
All right. So should we get into our questions here?
Yeah. Which one do you want to start with?
I think let's start with workouts because, obviously workouts lead into our races. And I think the concept
it might answer the other question. There you go.
Well, and I mean, we're talking about failing workouts. This question is around hitting power numbers in a workout. So I do think that then relates to what we're looking at in race.
Sure.
So the question really was just this person was, trying to do the prescribed workout and just was not hitting the numbers that were prescribed in the workout, to the point where they were actually concerned that the workout itself was wrong.
Or stressed, or straying on the side of the road, or beside
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Punching the wall beside your trainer or something.
We've also all been there.
So it's the second attempt at this workout and I failed miserably, and then can you confirm the values or something like that, right? So sometimes it's are my zones correct? And so I always start with, generally the goal isn't to fail workouts, but that's not entirely true either. It's not that simple. But, when I'm designing a plan, I'm not trying to test someone and break them. That certainly in my philosophy is not. Some coaches are a little harder and they are trying to make athletes fail. And there are at a certain point in a certain athlete's part of the year, we might do workout till failure. In the same way that CrossFit might do something like till failure, or, in strength training, this is very common where you do a set of 5, and then, that one was a 3 and I dropped the weight. Next week I come back and I try and get 3 sets of 5 at that same weight or something like that.
And there is something to be said for doing a workout to failure, especially when you're thinking towards race day, right? Because you're inevitably going to be in some race where you've burned that one match too many, or lit that one match till it burns your fingers, or however we want to torture that metaphor. And having failed to quote unquote failed an interval and still have been able to finish the workout afterwards, I think is actually a huge mental boost to come back from a
and
bad
when
moment.
you say continue the workout after, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, okay, so you didn't say you have, I'm totally making this up, so you have 3 by 10 minutes at
200 watts.
110, yeah.
200 watts.
200 watts, there we go. And the second interval, you're only able to hit 180 as your
Sure.
average. You could get really grumpy and throw the bike out to the side of the road, Tour de France, grumpy racer style, and just be like, well, all is lost. Like, I'm not going to, I'm going home. Like, I
Sure.
suck. Or you could take a sip of water, have your snack after, maybe take even like an extra couple minutes of recovery time.
Yep.
Or not even take the extra minutes, just literally get into the next interval. And honestly, even if you hit 170 or you keep it at 180, that's still to me like a pass on the workout because you checked all you did the 3 sets. It might not have been perfect,
Sure.
but you did it. And honestly, sometimes you might surprise yourself. That sip of water or like sip of, sports drink or whatever it is might actually kind of give you that little boost to get back in the game.
So, yeah, and that to me doesn't even sound like failing. That sounds like you just finished the workout in the zone. And so sometimes with...
But I think a lot of people would frame it as failing.
Well, and with smart trainers and Zwift especially will take what's, a target, or which is essentially just the average of the zone. So sometimes, you'll make a zone very big, especially if it's like a hard interval. As a coach, you're like, okay, like just really wide, like put it somewhere in this super wide target. But then some of the trainer software, I'm not picking on Zwift, this is, you have to solve, when they're building software, you have to solve the stuff. Sometimes ranges aren't great because
Right.
it doesn't, the computer needs to do something, right? So it picks the average and it assumes that you as a person will know that plus minus, 10, 20%, that's fine. That's the zone. But a lot of people think that target is the only answer, and that like the coach might have actually told them that.
Right.
And so indoors, this can be reflected as you said, 200 watts times 3 by 10 workout at 200 watts exactly. And if it's 201, I'm great. But if it's 199, I am the biggest sack of poo out there. Right?
And God forbid you're using erg mode because that's where it gets even.
You definitely are, and then it's grinding you down, and you failed. So it's like, how big of a margin of error is there? And it's big. It's very big, and that's part of the reason people don't like going outside is because the margin, is bigger. You can't do as perfect. People can do very, very well. It is a skill, but there is obviously variability, and that's completely normal and fine. So to see someone do a 200 watts, in this 3 by 10 minute example, it wouldn't be a big deal to do 200, 180. I got tired. Okay, well, again, next week, because you're going to have this probably ideally in a training program, you would do the similar intervals week to week to week for a while. And so next week, what's your goal? You come back and maybe it's like, maybe you pull back on the first one, you do like 3 at 195 or something like that, right? And there you go. So it's not, that isn't failure. Failure to me would be, you went out at 200 and you couldn't even hold it for 1, and then you tried again, and then you freaked out and went home.
For sure.
And so that could be, the situations that could happen. So you got really mad and maybe you didn't need to, or you are just tired. And this happens all the time. Not often, but once a month probably, I go to the interval hill, I'm like, this is feeling really hard today. It's not quite the same as usual. The margin is like, I'm getting close to, this is really hard to even be in the big window. Try the second one, maybe try a different strategy at it. And then you're like, I just feel really junky and not super motivated. And then I go home. So instead of doing 3 by 10 or 4 by 10, I do 2 by 10 and then I go home. And I don't try and make it up. I don't really freak out about it. I continue with the plan. The next day is an endurance day, then maybe a rest day, and then the next day is an interval day, and then usually I smash that next interval day because my body just needed more recovery. So
you're not looking at that as failure, I think, is like the important part of the... So it's really a reframing when we're saying like, why are you failing workouts? I think the attitude has so much to do with the failing.
Sure.
So it's funny because like that exact same scenario, if someone had just like in frustration been like angry about it and had gone home after the second interval, is a completely different situation than you being like, I really am tired. I should go home and have more like rest. It's really like, it's the exact same workout. It's just a completely different emotional response to it.
Sure. Yeah. And it's often, we talk about our wearables and how to use them. I think we just had a recent one around wearables and adapting day to day. A lot of times the HRV isn't even expressing it. So often, this is even Marco from HRV for Training often says, one of the biggest limiters, when we're talking about doing the same work or doing the expected work, is often muscular fatigue. Having very high muscular fatigue today from my 20K run, my calves and my quads are just so sore. So if I try to go out today and do intervals, I wouldn't be able to do it. But my HRV is in normal range.
Right.
The HRV for Training app asks me about my muscle soreness and a few other things. So it actually has said, like, you're probably a little, the muscular soreness slider is at the high end. So it's actually said, you're probably not the great day to just try and do intervals. Mm-hmm. So that app works very well for that. But you might still follow your plan, go out and surprise yourself some days, or other days that might be more information where you're like, yeah, it's just not quite going the same as usual. The perceived exertion to get up this hill is very hard, or to do the usual power is the heart rate's maybe very depressed if it's muscular soreness. So I think that's it, is just reframing that, like, rarely is failing even a thing in training, because it's all just training, it's all just practice. And what you're looking for is a nice stimulus. And some days you don't need much of a stimulus. And other days you can do the workout as planned, but there is that big range. So usually when you're failing, I usually suggest to people, like, especially cyclists, and for runners, this would be pace. I would say, pretend like you don't have power. Take it off the screen. Would you continue doing the workout, just by feeling, right? Like, you're going hard for 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever for this hill. Would you keep going just by feeling? Like, can you go up the hill another 2 times?
Ooh, I really like that. And I think that's going to get into our next question about heart rate and power during a race. But I think, so many times we get so invested in that number on the screen that we forget that the number on the screen is actually just the objective, like, measure of what we're putting out. But we're not we stop paying attention to what we're putting out and start paying attention to the number. So
that's sometimes what I'll do. If the first one feels junky and it's like, I was expecting 350 watts and it's like 300 watts, then I'll say, okay, well, I'll just flip it over and just go by time. And the odd time it is just whatever. Like, the power meter's different, or I was off that day, but, like, the feeling's actually not too bad. And so I just do it. And sometimes that's an okay thing. And the load is decreased anyhow because I'm probably doing those 300 watts. And is 300 watts perfect for if this was a, whatever type of interval, a higher intensity interval? Say that's more like a moderate interval now. Well, you've decreased the load for that day and you had some fatigue. So you've effectively adjusted the load as well. So that's could be fine training as well, right? And again, make sure you recover and refuel, and then the next interval session should go to plan. Like, I don't see a huge issue with that strategy either. Where I wanted to go with now was sort of thinking back to your original example where you said 3x10 and you did 200 watts, 180.
I said 200, 180, and then it was a question mark for the third.
Okay, so you're really cracking. Those are good experiences to have, I think, because in races, often that's the scenario. If you think about a 3-lap race, whatever the duration, like whatever you race, cyclocross or marathon or whatever, there's 3 laps or 3/3, that make up this. Can you have 3/3? Yeah, 3/3 that make up this event, right? So if we divided the event into thirds, there's like the start, which is often a little faster. There's like the middle, the valley of despair, or valley of death. You're getting tired, but the finish line feels a long ways away. And then there's the last interval, feel fine. I can see this is finish line.
You're going to talk about Balat now, aren't you?
No, not necessarily, but that's where in the intervals, a lot of times those middle ones are the ones where things fall apart because you're starting to feel tired and your expectation was that you wouldn't feel tired, but the finish line's a long ways away. Anyone who's done cyclocross has experienced this you are so pinned, you come across and the person flips the card and it's like 152 laps to go. It probably says like 7 or 8 or something, but it's a lot of laps and you're like, I am so tired and we're only
I thought it was going to be 2.
Yeah, 5 minutes into this race, why aren't they ringing the bell? And it's like, it's 9 laps to go.
40 minutes is the longest race duration. Like, I will fight anyone who disagrees with me.
Yeah.
But 40 to 60 minutes is legitimately the longest race duration because you have to be going just so freaking hard.
So what the intervals then can start showing you is that you can persist. You can be a little bold in the middle, and it's figuring out how hard can you push. And it's a little specific to the type of racing you're doing, but I imagine the training you're doing is specific. So these intervals might be more longer tempo intervals. If you're a marathon racer, if you're a cyclocross racer, this might be like a VO2 or a threshold interval, perhaps. And so you get used to working at the sort of race specific intensity, but knowing, okay, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to mitigate this. I'm going to like do what I can in the middle. And then, oh, that last interval actually went up a bit, or just, I got myself to the finish line. And I do think that there's sometimes value in just, yep, it was 170 watts. I was expecting 220 watts. I lost 50 watts, but you know, it took me a little longer to get up the hill or through the segment I was doing. Sometimes that's where doing intervals by distance can be more race specific, is you still go to the top of the hill. And your carrot is that if you go faster, the interval's over quicker, the race is over quicker. So that's where, you know, if you use that local hill, it almost doesn't matter. The only goal for the day was 4 times up the hill or 4 times around, you know, your little crit loop or your time trial loop. You know, again, we talked about this a few weeks ago. I always use hill examples. It doesn't have to be a hill. But that's sometimes the things by distance can be really good, because then it sort of frees you up that the goal was to do it, and you're just doing them sort of as intervals, and sometimes the time are different, right? Sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 11 minutes.
Now, I'm going to flip the question a little bit, because I think this is all great for the highly motivated person who really doesn't want to fail their workout. But I think there is, and like I'm super guilty of this sometimes, like the person who kind of wants the excuse to not go super hard that day.
Oh.
So this is the person who needs to hear this is probably not going to hear it, and the person who doesn't need to hear it is going to hear it kind of situation.
I almost wonder if there's, not to complicate the question, but there's probably your, I think it was Guy Thibault, which if you've ever done Canadian cycling, like coach education, in the book, there's like this interval, it's a very complicated interval table with like multiple curves for VO2 max or max aerobic power, MAP, or in French it would be PAM, P-A-M. And so it's just like this like curve. If you look up like Guy Thibault interval, probably that it would pop up like in Google image search. I'm telling you all this because he would say, so the intervals are very long, like they're very long sets versus what most people would ever do. So it'd be like 4 sets of 7 by 1 minute intervals.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like 28 intervals by 1 minute, but you get a longer break between sets of 7. So It's a little complicated, but just 28 intervals, and there's like, you know, variable recovery in there. The question is always, how hard should I do this? And he doesn't really, these are older tables, of course. But the idea is that like, you just do them. And unfortunately, like a lazy athlete, you know, is just going to be doing them at lower outputs, and maybe towards the end will like spike it up. But a motivated athlete, and he had these words that I think was partially like French translation. These are the stories I've heard. I don't even know if they're true, but anyhow, there was like the motivated athlete and the lazy athlete. I always laughed about the lazy athlete, but I guess that's that. So in your example, then you're saying the person. So I think the lazy athlete has to go up the hill 4 times. You know, and that's the goal. And their progression isn't even necessarily any performance target. It's like, you know, what's the hill, and just go up it. And then you can start building goals off of that, right? Like that's the problem with failing and you've never done the interval. Sort of this gets to our complete before you compete. Mm-hmm. That should be applied to intervals. If you've never done it, like take it easy on yourself. Don't like try and personal best your first 3 by 10 minute interval set. Just start moderate and conservative, and like if you're the type of person who often fails, you're going to have to scale back a couple, right? And then the idea that you're going to finish and finish and finish, and that we're never looking for a 10 out of 10 effort workout. Like that's maybe the heart of this question, is that the vomiting in the workouts and the like falling over on the side of the road, like that is reserved for maybe once a season for most of us, where we go to our bucket list race and we drain it. That's 10 out of 10 effort. But you do see some people, and maybe this is more on the very motivated athlete who's quitting because it has to be perfect and they have to push right to their limit. And it's like, no, most things are like 80 to 90% of your, you know, max heart rate, or 80 to 90% of your threshold. Like most stuff is not that hard. And that's the challenging thing, is, you know, just ease into it. Mm-hmm. Right. And if this, I guess that's sometimes too, like the effective thing you can do is, for any of these athletes, probably we're not doing 10 out of 10 workouts. Stuff shouldn't be that hard. We want to finish and accumulate fitness. So if you're someone who really struggles with this, like I would start at endurance pace, get 10 minutes as slow as you can go up the hill. And then you're thinking negative splits. So a little faster and a little faster. So this week, yes, you're giving up the first of the 10-minute intervals, but remembering that you, in the alternate universe, you probably quit it after the first one or the second one. So we're going to get 3. And yes, the first one is a little out of zone. It's a little too easy. But, you'll see the finish line on the third one and you'll get it. Now, next week, now we have a bit of a goal setting thing. So we saw, okay, that middle one maybe looked okay. So you did like in our 200 watt example you started with, maybe it's like, the person does 150 watts and then maybe 160 watts, and then they could see the finish line, so they actually did 200 watts. I would come in and say, okay, 175 times 3. See if you can do that this week. Maybe that's too fast. Maybe you'd have to even ladder it up again, still restrict that first interval, like another interval at 150, something like that. And that's what I would do if someone was really struggling to get through the workouts and always just was trying to smash. You'll see all of us want that higher threshold, right? But again, it's not testing. So you'll see someone who should be doing 200 or 190, 200, and it's always rolling out at 220. Just I know 220 is what all my friends do 220. I do 220.
First of all your friends don't do 220. Don't worry. Second, I love the idea, kind of what you just said, that everyone wants the higher threshold. I think this is a big careful what you wish for. Because if your threshold is higher, guess what? Everything else gets harder.
Yeah, no, it never gets easier. That's certainly the dilemma. Yeah, it's much better to set your threshold low.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that for sure.
Feels great.
And I'll be honest, I've come to terms with that. I'm yeah, it's way better. Just way better. It's just easier. Yeah. And I think it's more effective as well if you just set it accurately. That's sort of the system. Yeah.
And the last thing I wanted to add on this whole discussion as far as the numbers go, we were kind of alluding to the range earlier, but I'm working on this article about critical power for Bicycling Magazine, and it's really had me in touch with a lot of different researchers and, more on the exercise science side of things, but then also a few not just coaches, but higher level, physiologists and stuff. And what they've all said is just all of these things are so fake.
Right.
They're so not inaccurate. That's not the right word, but they're all, when you say oh, my FTP is 220, it's not. It's between 200 and 240 ish.
Depending on where you are, what you're measuring, which day it is, the time of day, what you had before, are you fueled? Yeah. Yeah.
What you're using. Are you on your smart trainer? Or are you using your power meter? Are you at altitude? Are you not at altitude? Is it hot out? Is it not hot out?
I don't know if we need to dive deep into critical power, but the critical power is sort of a separate framework or an alternate framework to the FTP, FTP framework,
but
right?
Even the most expert people on it are it's basically the same thing.
So they've come around. It's less, the people you've spoke to have been less adversarial.
Yes, or at least on the critical power versus FTP, not other things. There's a few things that are still butting heads on it, but the critical power FTP camps are pretty similar. There's just a weird thing with W prime that critical power has that FTP doesn't, that if I explain it, everyone's head is going to explode, so I won't. Don't worry about critical power.
So I guess, did you have another point in that?
No, it was just that it's a huge range and...
Oh, yes. Yeah, and the zones come out of those, and they're very big, and I think that's important to remember. But it is the one, I guess, important thing we should say. If you are failing your workouts, this could be an issue of and I always say setting with 17 asterisks, and clients will always see this, where there's the setting, the FTP or threshold setting. It's a setting. Just think about it as resistance. So when I go on the indoor trainer, I set it much lower because I am not great at riding the trainer. It's a different power meter. So often I will set it, the motivation is lower indoors. So for me, I just know it's just it's significantly lower that I set that setting, the resistance setting indoors, so that I can finish the workout at an appropriate, there's heart rate and there's feeling. For me, the feeling is a big part indoors. It just crushes me now. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I ever trained indoors, but it's certainly the intensity part I find difficult now. So again, if this is an indoor issue, I would say possibly, especially if you test it outside on a different power meter, it's just a different calibration, a completely different world. If you're using the same power meter indoors, it's probably a little closer, but still the environment's very different. In the same way that you'd probably find if you were testing on a nice long hill versus a flat, you're probably going to see variability there. And I think that's what they're saying too, with what you're, everything's so variable that as much as you want that one magic number, there's going to be a big range there, and you're going to have to come back to feeling, maybe a bit of heart rate in there too. Mm-hmm. But just did you do 3 by 10 minutes and was it sort of hard? That's probably, interval training.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's
yeah.
no secret sauce to.
And if you did 1x10 and it was really hard, then again, you were supposed to do 3x10. We're accumulating time in zone. Like that's a basic training principle is it's not one Strava effort for 3 minutes as hard as you can go and then go home because you did the 1 3 minute and you got the segment. It's 5 or 7 by 3 minutes.
Right.
And it's not at the Strava time. And that's sort of the like paradigm of this like world that we live in is maxing out and testing every day. That's how CrossFit got the bad name. I think they've improved on this in a lot of cases, but there was that like always the like name on the board, maximal time, maximal effort. It's just not training, right? Like that's testing is the thing. So it's coming back to like what was the mission of the day and did you pace accordingly? And because this is like what's going to transfer over to your races is that experience of the goal for your race on the weekend was it wasn't 120K where you want to try and beat my time because I did at 120K and just sent it.
I did really kind of want to beat your time.
I was worried you did because the timing was off and I was like, how did she do 4 at the same pace?
I came close to beating your time on the first lap. I was within striking distance of your time.
Okay. Yeah. Really close. But it would be weird if you did and then completely caved in and were just dropped 50 minutes in a 2-hour lap. You faded by 50%. That would be bad pacing, bad interval training, whatever you want to call it, right? So again, embracing that interval training as training. It's not testing. It's a separate thing. It's not a reflection of who you are. You're accumulating load on your body and experience. And some of that experience we're accumulating is the bad days. Mm-hmm. We talk about that rule of thirds. I think, this is where that comes in is, there's the really good days, there's the unremarkable like average days, and then there's the not so good days. And those not so good days, there's the other cliche I can wrap into this cliche is that how you react on those bad days. I don't even know what the saying is. I really am losing it here, but that's what the training days is the ones that aren't the best, and that's where the character is built and this sort of thing, right? Where it's like, I show up and I do what I can and don't overthink it, right? Because again, some days it's 2x10 instead of 3x10, and then the next interval day is fine, right? It's another day.
Yeah. Side note, did you find yourself slowing down on that course because it had so many outs and backs on itself that like in the last 2 miles were you panicking that you took a wrong turn? Because I definitely did.
Well, I was not as prepared because I didn't have my watch. So I had there was no markings for distance.
No.
So again, when we're pacing and in races, ideally you do have some sort of feedback, right? And that is why when we're doing intervals, you either have power or you're on the set hill. So you're getting feedback for your pacing. I'm halfway up the hill. When I get to this road, I know that I only have 2 minutes to go.
So it's probably actually easier for you though, because you didn't know where you were in the world. So you didn't have to you were just following what you could follow.
And I was just there for a good time, so it didn't matter a ton. But you're trying to spend your energy.
I would have been furious with you had you taken 3 hours.
Right. So I would say the only place that there's sort of again that valley of despair in the middle where I was like, I know that I'm over 10K, but I don't know exactly. If you told me I was at 7, I'd believe you. If you told me I was at 14, I'd believe you. There's somewhere in the middle here. So then you're like, well, should I slow down? Or should I just be bold? But you don't know because 7 and 14 is a different point, and I was, getting fatigued. So then I popped out, and then I realized I was at this end of this bike race Paris to Ancaster we do, and I was like, oh. So I sent that last climb pretty well, but I mean that's the difference of maybe a minute I made up there at most, right? I don't think I was moving that quickly. So I don't know what your question was, but pacing was hard.
I was just trying to say I struggled a lot at about 10 miles because I kind of knew where I was, but not really. And then I was really nervous that I took a wrong turn because of how the course was just so many out and backs and
people going other directions.
Kind of random arrows that it was
well marked, but not confirming that you were on the right path.
Exactly.
So I did have that where I was I think maybe now I'm on the same course that I was and I'm doing an extra lap.
Yeah, exactly. And
which is where the distance markers would have helped because you could have got confirmation that, oh, okay, I am at 15K.
Yeah, because I was getting terrified. There were also a couple where you would come into where there was an arrow for the other direction, so you'd hit a 3-corner thing,
right,
or a 3-way
sort of
thing, and you could see the other arrow.
Overthought it,
yeah. So it I saw a few people stopped and trying to figure it out.
But they were overthinking it.
But then the worst part was you'd stop you'd start thinking
You get
about it, you would
disoriented.
turn around and get disoriented. So it was very much like I was actually
In their
terrified.
defense, I can't imagine many people got off track. I saw a couple.
I mean, it was very Walmart.
things.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
I was also terrified going into the porta potties at the rest areas for obvious reasons. Race porta potties, not great. But I was also terrified that I would go in and get disoriented when I came out because a couple of the rest stops were
I don't know. if that's true.
multi-directional.
You think so?
At least one of them was.
Oh.
And I was well, and also the rest, like the porta potties were sort of set back from the actual aid station, so you could have accidentally gone backwards on the course.
I guess.
Like you could have just come the way you came, like gone back the way you came if you were kind of disoriented.
Sure.
And no one would have stopped you.
Okay.
So anyway, moving on.
We're talking about the race though, so we may as well go on. So
Let's hit
we've
this.
covered the failing the workout. Again, most workouts shouldn't be maxed out. Just pull it back a little bit. Try
You're
it
fine.
Try it for 2 weeks and see how your training
You're
is.
fine. Everything's great. Next question. Should I look at heart rate or power during a race? And I think like we almost need to kind of reframe this question as should I look at power or sorry, when I hear it, I'm thinking should I look at heart rate or should I be looking at power
Oh,
versus should I be looking at
like anything. Yeah. Or what should I pay attention to?
So you often hear, we kind of wrote down a few things that you hear from clients all the time where it's, my heart rate was too low today, so I knew I could go faster. I didn't hit my max heart rate today. Or my heart rate was really high, or my heart rate was too high. It was at max, so I knew I was done. And so
Right. So this
pull
is
the way
like,
back.
and that first one you said it slightly differently, but my heart rate was too low today, so I know I could have gone faster. So it's actually like sort of a negative statement. So all those are sort of negative and like someone got scared during the race. And so to me, that's you've been attending to an irrelevant cue. So you're paying attention to something that has no positive effect, if not any effect,
Right.
on what you're doing. Right. You're in a mountain bike race. And you look down and you see 190 beats and you say, that is far too high. I did not come here to work maximally for 90 minutes today. Why is it so high? I must suck. And then you hit a tree or something, right? Like you should have been paying attention to the tree, to the race, to fueling, to your gearing, where are you going, navigation. There's so much stuff to pay attention to in an off-road race.
Any race.
That's much more valuable, that's going to have a bigger effect on your performance. And then the problem is that I don't know what you're going to do with this information in a lot of situations. Now, as you like, it does depend. There are applications for power and heart rate in racing. So right off the bat, we'll say that. But in many circumstances and for many people, I think like a map screen maybe is helpful, or, just sometimes I'll just swipe it over to like, there's an interval one that, has no relevance to the day, just like a really, maybe time of day or something, but you have to be so careful.
Or put your computer in your pocket.
Or tape it over or whatever. Now,
Tape used to be remember companies actually even made covers.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, that would be a little booty or something.
Yeah.
Like a shower cap for your Garmin.
I mean, adorable.
So that's the thing is I think especially for shorter events for mountain biking, gravel, there's not a ton there. Now, what would we start to maybe want to have on the screen? I've seen people with lap timers. You can set up an auto lap for like a cyclocross race or something. So I've seen people do that. It's a little complicated. And if you're actually pressing the lap button, you're going to forget to press the lap button. But sometimes when these races are hard to count, I've been in World Cup mountain bike races where it's 8 laps and you don't know what lap you're on. Often there is a nice indicator at some point in the race, a lap counter that's going to give you information that you don't need off your bike computer. So you don't always need to do that. In the race we were just talking about, this running race, distance would be a nice one. But during that race, would I look at pace or heart rate during that 20K effort? Probably not. Sometimes I'll put heart rate up, but I'm not someone who gets freaked out if I see 100%, right? If I saw my heart rate at 100%, I'd be like, wow, really recovered and pushing it. And I wouldn't really panic. Now, if you're someone who would freak out, which is most people, and misinterpret, again, it could be too low or too high. Like there is no right answer is the problem, right? Like I don't know what number. If you ask someone, usually they don't even, like what would be the appropriate number?
This is a very fair point, yeah.
Right? And then it's like, well, you're amped up. A lot of people are watching you. It's hot. You've recovered for your race, hopefully. You tapered down or whatever, peaked maybe. why wouldn't the heart rate be at maximal? Isn't that, again, that's sort of the idea. So again, this is sort of shorter stuff. So I think the cases where it would start being more relevant would be like your 100-miler. What will you look at during that? A 100-mile running race, it's taking essentially 24 hours. So this would be similar answer to your 24-hour relay mountain bike race. Not relay, your solo mountain bike race, like a 12-24 type thing.
I would look at nothing because I don't look at anything in training.
Okay.
Like, I don't use heart rate in training, so for me it would be completely irrelevant to start considering heart rate on race day, which I do think is actually a problem that people have. Like, they don't really spend that much time focusing on their heart rate during workouts or whatever, but then somehow race day, heart rate becomes super relevant.
So then how will you're running, you're leaving Leadville, you're at altitude, you're amped up.
I am strictly a perceived exertion person.
But they're all going, and how do you choose the pacing? Just by feeling.
Just by feeling.
And so you'd get, probably there's cues there, like you're breathing.
Yeah.
Would you look at the pace?
Not really.
Like you're rolling out of Leadville on pavement.
I've been running long enough that I sort of know, like, I have one pace for running.
Okay.
Like, it's not a per mile pace. Like, I have one.
Right.
Like, I am a diesel engine. I really only have one way of going.
And I think, something like a 24-hour mountain bike race, most of the people who are getting into that have done a fair bit of volume. They understand pacing, and like, this is not starting in a sprint. It's not one in the first lap. Some of the bike racer ones will, do a bit of a harder effort for the first few minutes of the 24-hour race to put themselves ahead of the Congo line.
Well, and I think that's even what Leadville is going to be like. That's sort of why I'm hesitant to answer your question, because it's going to be a bit dependent on, because everyone's going to go down that road and funnel into single track.
Right.
So you're going to kind of want to go a little ham at the start.
Yeah, and it is downhill, and we spoke about, sometimes in running you start breaking down muscularly as the day goes on. So sometimes it's like you may as well run a little bit before you break down, but it is sort of like have you broke yourself down prematurely as well? So there is that balance. With running, most of the events though too, there isn't so much of a Congo line in the single track that you would run into, and most people can walk or run, whereas in biking there can be a huge disparity between.
Right, you're gonna have people stopped.
Yeah. So that's sometimes there's tactics that have to play into that, but again, do you need anything on a screen, or does the 24-hour racer get out on the wheel of the relay people and just put themselves in a decent position and then settle into their pace? Once they're ahead of, at some point they're going to have to go through all the beginners and stuff, because it is a lapped race in those type of races.
Yeah. And I actually also think about power and heart rate for road racing. I always remember one of my Rucker cycling teammates telling me, like, during a race, you do whatever it takes to stay in the peloton for as long as you possibly can, because the second you're out the back, your race just got 20 times harder, and you're very, very unlikely to come back and win the race.
Right.
So this is, to me, like, in a road race, you look down, you see that your heart rate is, oh my God, I'm in threshold and this is a really long day. What are you going to do? Pull out of the peloton? Like, oh, good. Let me just let myself drift off the back and be by myself for the rest of this race. Like, it makes no sense.
And road racing is very much like that. And then you could sit and do nothing for an hour, right? It's tough. So you do have to go all in with that. So it is a tricky one where, again, will that data in the race add anything to your choices and the decisions that you're making? Or can you feel, okay, I need to like sit in here and try and grab some wind, but you're also, don't want to get dropped if there's like a attack that goes or something like that. So it is head up. Trying not to crash, trying to keep the food coming in versus staring at your device.
Flip side, gravel race, when you are out by yourself, then maybe it does make a little sense to at least occasionally check in on that stuff, especially if you are starting to feel like you might be overdoing it slightly.
And so this is, I think, where you start getting less of are you concerned about crashing into a tree? Are you less concerned about staying in a group? And this is where we're starting to talk about 100-mile, 200-mile gravel races, mountain bike races, running races. So now you have to start saying, am I going to have an issue holding back enough early, as I go up a hill? We were just speaking about the walking, running earlier in the episode. And that's where you might start putting in a limit. And this is something we should be practicing in training. I usually say it's around 85% of max heart rate. So this is, where does that come from? That's essentially where tempo becomes threshold, where the intervals you can do for, 2 hours become the intervals you do for 40 minutes, right? So if you were doing threshold intervals, this would be like your 10K to half marathon type pace, maybe in running. you're not doing that for 12 hours. So if you do the first 2 hours at your half marathon pace, right, there's or at your CP20, your 20-minute peak power. And I have seen this in Leadville. The first 20 minutes, the first 2 hours are, maxed out, right? And maybe the person in training hadn't maxed out and this was okay. But if it's near your max and you still have to ride for 6 or 8 or 10 hours or run for another bunch of hours, the pacing just probably isn't the best it could have been.
Yeah.
Right? Unless there's, it's downhill after there or something, right? Which doesn't happen. Yeah. So does that make sense? So that you might use heart rate there to limit. I don't generally use power targets because often the power meters just don't work on the race day. It's not a great excuse. It's getting better. You will see people use things like a rolling 30-second average to try and stay under their threshold power. So if they start seeing their power is creeping up towards their threshold, again, it's the same logic. You can do that power for maybe 60 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Why are you riding, a continuous amount of time at that? So just back it off. So there's probably something there where if you see the power is like at or above your threshold, right, and which is very hard. It's someone who has a threshold, 200, 250 in Leadville, they're going to be touching that anytime you go uphill off-road, that you're going to be up in that range. So it requires a lot of discipline and gear shifting to do that. And sometimes you just have to do it. So then now you're getting into this, well, now my power is 300 watts, I'm going to bonk. And so then that's where have trouble with power sometimes I don't know if during the race it's going to be as useful.
For sure.
Now let me give you one more example. Did you have anything on that?
No, you're good.
The one other place I've used it, and this is like sort of a niche example, but it may be in that your road racing example, they'll know, okay, this is my threshold. I'm alone on a breakaway, and there's a mountain in front of me, and I know in training I've done 310 watts for 30 minutes, and you'll see that. And the Tour de France is very now calculated, right? Where they know to the number, and you'll see the guys just slamming out like a perfect interval up the mountain, and they'll do it, right? I've used that a little bit in like a mountain bike stage race or something like that, where I start just noticing, okay, when this group we're all together, there's 5 of us. When we're climbing at like 280, 300 for me, everyone's different based on weight and everything else. If I get away, then I know, okay, well, I'm just going to try and hold 300 on every climb or whatever. And,
right.
And because the problem is once you get away, it's hard to motivate because now you're getting chased, right? So sometimes the power can be a bit of a target, but you've also sort of like started collecting a bit of information about, how the group's been reacting. And then you can sort of like taper out the efforts a little bit. So I've used it sometimes for that. Again, and this is like very niche. It's just like where you're maybe alone in a mountain bike race. Sometimes I've used that as targets to, always hit, a certain amount on a climb as I'm going, up a steady bout or something where like there isn't a lot of paying attention to not hitting trees. So it's rather than following someone's wheel, I'm saying hold on to 600 watts for this like 40-second climb, because there's nothing else to like, motivate you. But that also is the same as saying like just smash up this as hard as you can. There's not really a huge pacing to that, but that would be the other place that I've maybe used power in a race. But again, I'd prefer to have someone to just race against and chase and run away from too.
And I think, I guess maybe last thought on the topic, which is never our last thought, but we're going to try. I think this all comes back to training as well. So this comes back to the last question and talking about, how things actually feel. Because I think sometimes in training, we maybe get so wrapped up in the power and the heart rate that we forget to actually think about, but how do I feel when I'm riding at threshold? Or how do I feel when I'm riding at tempo? And if you can start kind of tuning into that during your workout, it makes it, I think, a lot easier to tune into your feelings during the race and actually be making like fairly accurate assessments on how you're actually doing instead of needing to see a screen and then panicking at whatever it says.
For sure. And I do think in your workouts, I'm trying to think of ones that we would have. So, off-road time trial is one of my favorites. And it's, 4 by 10 minutes. You make a little route. Often we'll do a 5-minute route, but sometimes a 10-minute route. And so you come around, it's like a lap. You might call that a lap. This sounds a lot like a mountain bike race. And you just send it as hard as you can. And it should have ups and downs. We'd like it to be, so we get a bit of like, an interval like physiology effect. But it is technical. It should be specific. It should be challenging, to your skills. If you're bad at log hops, maybe you include 5 log hops in this loop. but there's no heart rate or power. It's just the time for the loop. And so getting more of that, like time for the hill, time for the loop, and record power and heart rate. You can even look at them during the interval, but you're still just going up the hill as fast as you can. So that's probably the thing, is to try and keep reflecting on, like, I'm going up this hill, you know, what is the rhythm, what is the feeling? And just periodically you might look at heart rate or power. But the thing is, as you go up the hill, you know, you're going to start finding that even if you don't pay attention to it, it sort of happens.
Right.
Your heart rate becomes 90%. You know, your power to get up this hill, you know, when you're, you know, I'm doing an interval, I go up this hill, the range is very minimal, right? Like, it's going to take the watts it takes to get up that hill. Most of us don't have, you know, there's not so much range that there's an option even. So I think that's a good experience. And then the other one I do for gravel folks is something like, you know, you ride for a few hours and then you finish moderate or you finish hard. I think David does these with running too, right? Like some like moderate for 30 minutes, maybe not always finishing. I like the finishing because it's sort of like you get a little tired for a gravel race and then it's full send. And again, those full sends aren't a power or a heart rate. It's try and ride over like a challenging terrain for you and feel that, because that's going to be the most specific to like a gravel situation where stuff's coming at you, potholes are coming at you, you're into a segment, you're descending really fast, you're going up a climb. And then that's when I start visualizing, even like, this is the last climb in the race and I'm ahead, and like you're running for your life, right? And someone's coming and people are cheering, and then, you know, you get like chills and you know, and then now this is like so rich that you've experienced that scenario where you're tired, but you're just trying to get up this last hill. But again, I didn't say anything about heart rate or power. You're just trying to get up the last hill. So that's where I think as your race approaches, this is the specific phase where we're starting to move from, you know, the heart rate, the power, the physiology intervals. Maybe you're doing those on the trainer or the road. Now you're bringing that off road and trying to get a few more days of the week where it is a bit more like getting up the hill as fast as you can. And again, that would be things like threshold and VO2 intervals where you don't really have an option. We all just, like, if you're going to do 5x3, there isn't a ton of range. You don't have much choice, right? You're going up the hill.
And if you have to pay off your kids to come stand on the hill and scream and, you know,
I've seen that.
ring cowbells and generally like make a fuss, perfect. Actually, honestly, again, coming back to the race this weekend, having done laps of the course, the first time I came up, our whole team was still there and like screaming and shrieking, and like it was like it took me a while to recover from it, actually, like starting the second lap, because it was like a wall of noise, and then I was like back out and quiet, and I realized that's going to happen a lot at Leadville because you're going to come through these aid stations with a ton of people. So I actually was thinking about that during the race. I was like, oh, that was actually a really good stimulus, because I'm super stressed out right now and like really thrown off, and I need to kind of come back to myself and get back there. So, which
is the argument for, we spoke about, you know, do you have to do the race distance before you race the race distance, and that maybe those key workouts end up being at a C priority race. You know, again, you did this at a relay race. It wasn't the most serious race. You know, you could have entered a 50-mile as part of this, but you know, whatever. But this is where some of the stuff gets pressure tested. Like, I didn't have my watch. I was a dummy. I would have preferred to have my watch feedback. My shorts were like too baggy because it got wet. So then I had like baggy like pants behind my leg, and it was hitting my hamstring. So you're pressure testing some of this stuff, including, you know, what are you paying attention to during the race? What information do you want during the race? And then when you get to the big day, hopefully it's the right information and not anything that's going to distract you.
Cool. Well, I think we answered that one.
So it depends is the answer.
It depends is always the answer.
But I think there is like the more you have to avoid trees, the less you should be looking at a Garmin. And the more you're thinking about pacing and tapering your efforts over a long, long day, the more you might think about some of this stuff, at least early in the race. But most of racing comes down to feeling, I think what you're going to find.
Yep. There's our pull quote for the week. Awesome. All right. As always, head over to consummateathlete.com or at consummateathlete on Instagram if you have any questions you want us to hit in a upcoming episode. Rating, review, subscribe, all that fun stuff is greatly appreciated. We have links to how to do that over at consummateathlete.com. Definitely check that out. And with that, we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.